Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптя посорбати довбані щі, та трохи у щах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Зі сходу припхались до нас барани, для восстановлення великої страни, найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Їх доводи, всяке озброєння, різне, ракети, потужні машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, і ми зачаїли на орків образу, з бандитів російських робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, на вбивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто ж винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає їх цар.
Hello everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
Hello, everybody, and it's good to be with you on another big fundraiser night.
And tonight we're going to be reporting the Day 95 news and also running our normal Sunday night fundraiser. Some of y'all may have noticed that the fundraiser goal is low tonight, and that is a deliberate choice. We did decide after the last massive fundraiser that the Lee Spring Army has done a load of work, and I have been getting some comments from people saying that they're getting pretty pressured to support, like they're picking up like their third job or something like that. And while I admire that greatly, I don't want people in my like group in my Lee Spring Army to be incredibly stressed out. And so we've lowered the goal tonight so that way we don't have to feel like we have to break our backs to get this thing going. But I have already put in my $100, and so if you would like to help me help Razom of Ukraine for the second time, please make sure to put in some support towards the fundraiser, because of course the Ukrainians will greatly appreciate it. Just to give a little bit of a side note about Razom of Ukraine again, Razom of Ukraine does a lot of work for Ukrainian veterans and also soldiers currently serving. Let's pull up their website actually, so that way I can show y'all what they're about, like in 100%. So here's the website for Razom of Ukraine. We can actually go to their projects tab, and we can see all kinds of stuff that they're doing in support of veterans. They, of course, have emergency response. They also are saving children as well. They also have a stipend for soldiers where they can get a scholarship to go to college after the war is over. And so while some of the support is, of course, immediate and direct, like saving children and also emergency response supplies, some of their support is kind of going to be like a present to these brave Ukrainian soldiers once this war is over, or once their contract's over, because when they exit out of the military, they will be given a scholarship to go to university wherever they would like within Ukraine, and I believe even abroad, and some of that may be our support. So make sure if you would like to help out the Ukrainian soldiers, and also there are other projects as well, as they have a large list of them here, make sure to put in some support tonight, because it is, of course, always greatly appreciated by all of the nonprofits that we help out, and in the end, the Ukrainians are very pleased about it. I do have some unfortunate news to say tonight before the stream kicks off all the way, is that Operator Starsky was not able to join us tonight. I was told about 3 hours before the stream of this by Starsky himself, and not to get into too many details and give away what he is doing, but he is going to his headquarters of his unit right now near Kyiv, and he is going to be issued some new orders. So unfortunately, he can't be on right now, but I do wish him the best of luck, as he actually is out there. It may, well, I'm not going to say anything about that because I'm not sure if you would want that to be known, but he is out there doing business, taking care of business in Ukraine, and so I do wish him the best of luck. So sadly, he can't come on tonight, but I hope that everyone does understand that Starsky is, of course, in the Ukrainian army in wartime, so his schedule is a little bit more fluid than mine, and he has to be able to react to the situation. And so with that, we're now going to move on into tonight's schedule for the news, and oh golly, we've got a lot of it, and the thumbnail and the title is no lie at all. The Ukrainians have managed to perform a miracle today, something that no one believed would happen, not even me, and this caught me entirely by surprise when I saw the news today. The Ukrainians have managed to push the Russians back from the T1302 Highway, ensuring that it is not even close to the front lines anymore, being some 5 miles away from the actual highway. So while it's of course an artillery distance, the front line is not going to overrun this highway anymore and cause it to be shut off. So the Ukrainian supplies and logistics will carry on at the normal speed they usually do to Severodonetsk and Lysychansk still, and the Ukrainians have managed to push the Russians back a little bit, even in the area of the front line where they have diverted all of their resources, supplies, and efforts. So a huge change in the situation up here in the Severodonetsk and Lysychansk area. It takes a lot of pressure off of the Ukrainians, and it lets them have a little bit of a breather for a second, although the situation is still a little bit tense. With that, we're now going to go over the schedule for tonight. We're actually going to be starting off with the international news, because one thing I think is important to show is that support for Ukraine is still international. There are massive amounts of rallies that are still occurring around the world, and so I would like to show those today, along with some news about what the Polish will be giving the Ukrainians. We'll get back to that in a minute. Finally, we'll go to the Russian news, and then we will go to the location unknowns. We'll actually be covering all of that in one single segment, and after that segment is over, we'll then be moving towards the Kharkiv and northern Donbass Severodonetsk area. We'll also answer 3 questions from the chat before we get to the Kharkiv area, and we'll also recognize some of our largest donors for the night. Of course, Narya is a legend here on this channel. I didn't see that they supported the last Sunday fundraiser, but who cares? I mean, like, they literally put in like $5,000 most of the times on most of the fundraisers, and so I feel like they need that Narya needs a break as well, and so totally deserved. They've gone above and beyond, but maybe we'll get a special appearance from Narya tonight as she comes through and knocks it out of the park when in terms of support and the super chats, and well, not really the super chats, but in terms of the support, and it's unbelievable to me, and it always blows me away, and it blows away everyone in the live chat. So maybe we'll get a visit. I don't really know. But after that, we will then move from the northern Donbass and Severodonetsk area down to the rest of the news here on the southern front, and we'll answer another 3 questions in between the transition, and we'll also be recognizing the largest donors again in between that period. Then we'll cover all of the southern front news, and then finally we'll wrap up tonight's stream with a speech from President Zelensky here in Kyiv. So we'll kind of be going full circle in a way. And so, without further ado, let's get right into the news. We're going to start off in the most west that we can go as far as the news is concerned tonight, in Paris, where we can see that a rally has been held in support of Ukraine today, and it looks to be quite sizable, and also right in front of a historic landmark in Paris. The Eiffel Tower, of course, not to get into a lot of history, but it was the tallest structure in the world when it was constructed, and I believe it was made for the World's Fair of 1884 or 1888. I'm not particularly sure. Eiffel Tower. I'm sorry, I know this isn't exactly Ukraine news, but I want to make sure I'm saying that correctly. Oh boy, come on. Let's see, I want to get here. Let's scroll down to here. Tallest tower in the world from 1889. So I believe it was the World's Fair of 1888 or 1889. So it was 1889. I was kind of off a little bit, but still, we can see that they're in front of a historic landmark, and there is still massive amounts of support for Ukraine in France. Very good to see, because we do know that France has kind of been in a shaky political situation because of the election in between Macron and Le Pen that just occurred a little while ago. There was actually a decent amount of support for Le Pen, which does show that some people may actually be pro-Russian or indifferent to what's going on in Ukraine within France. And so it's good to see that there is, of course, overwhelming support in France, which is a little bit of a questionable country in terms of its support for Ukraine. And so with that, we're now going to move on eastwards and more towards Ukraine again, where we're going to visit the city of Warsaw. Warsaw, of course, has been in the news a decent amount. The Polish have taken more Ukrainian refugees than any other country around the world, and we could see today that the Polish are more than happy to take these refugees on and still spearhead the cause of trying to get as much support for Ukraine as possible. Here we can see a massive rally where a large amount of Polish citizens have gathered in a square in the city of Warsaw and are, of course, showing their support for Ukraine. Here's the video. So, of course, wonderful to see that there is so much support for Ukraine within Poland. Of course, Poland's not a questionable country in its support for Ukraine. The Ukrainians and the Polish, even before this war, considered each other pals. And so it's not really unheard of to see this kind of support from the Poles over the entirety of this war. But it's still great to see that their fervor for this has never waned. And the crowds that come out in these rallies and protests are as large as they were within the first week of the war. And so with that, we're going to move on to a little bit of news that may lead some people to think, are the Polish really having the Ukraine's best interests at mind? And I'm not really sure, because today we got news that Poland has given Ukraine crabs. I'm just kidding. They're called crabs, but they are SPGs. They look very similar to an M109. Here's a picture of one of them. I believe it most likely uses a 155mm artillery piece, but the Polish have said that they're going to send 18 of these to Ukraine. So in all seriousness, it is a decent amount of support. Of course, the Ukrainians are asking all the time for heavy artillery, and it seems that the entire world has been coming together to ensure that they'll be able to deliver on that promise of giving them as much heavy artillery as possible. So I guess in this case, it is actually a good thing that Poland is giving Ukraine crabs. And so with that, we're now going to move on beyond the international news, and we're now going to move into the news in Russia. the Russians have been trying to say that the war's been going pretty well for them. And of course, if you live inside of Russia, you wouldn't know any different unless if you visit a graveyard. And today we've seen a graveyard in the city of Ulyanovsk, which is on the Volga River, and we've actually seen that this city, which is also the headquarters of the VDV, has had bodies stacking high in the cemeteries surrounding the city. Here's a picture of one of these cemeteries, and you can see all of the fresh graves that have been made, all of the floral arrangements with the Russian flag on it, and showing that these are Russian soldiers that have been killed. And this cemetery looks like it's filling up incredibly quickly. And so, very interesting to see. And I have to say that this is definitely evidence that while the Russians are trying to pretend like the casualties aren't high, the Russians are taking massive amounts of casualties, because even in the amount of bodies they bring home, they're filling up cemeteries in the large amounts of towns, villages, and small cities like Ulyanovsk. So with that, very interesting to see that the Russians are actually filling up cemeteries with the amount of dead that they've just gotten back. And we know that's not all of them. We know that the Ukrainians have thousands of bodies within refrigerated train cars that are still trying to be sent to Russia, but the Russians are refusing to take them. And so with that, we're now going to move on into Ukraine itself, and we're going to get straight into the location unknowns. And boy, do we have a small amount tonight. Compared to last night, which was 15 points, we only have 11 points tonight, which I'm very happy to say. Starting off with our first bit of news, we can see a video of trench warfare. Now, this video is from a while back. I did try and check, and I found out it was. But one thing that I never saw was this footage. And so this was the first time I saw it today, and I wanted to make sure to show it on stream, because this is a great example of how trench warfare has always been conducted, and also an incredible example of Ukrainian heroism and bravery in the face of, I guess you could say, imminent death. And while that is unfortunate to say, you will see later on in the video that the brave Ukrainian soldier that is in this film did unfortunately succumb to his injuries fighting the Russians, but he didn't go down without a fight. And so here's the video. Here we can see multiple Russian soldiers here within the trench. And we can see that they're trying to advance downwards on the trench. We can now see that one of them has hopped into the trench further down and is trying to advance down it. And we can see that they have a large amount of trench works to cover. We can now see what may be a Ukrainian soldier that's coming down the trench towards them. And it now looks like they've gotten in a firefight with the Russians. And it looks like, I couldn't really tell exactly, but he may have actually been shot and fallen where he was. Trench warfare is one of the most hectic kinds of warfare historically. Nothing can really compare because of the small spaces. The reaction time that one has to have when fighting in a trench has to be incredibly quick, or you will just be killed. There's not a lot of time for you to see the enemy, and so reaction times have to be fast, and also the amount of time you have to react is incredibly small. We can now see what appears to be another Ukrainian soldier advancing down the trench. I'm assuming behind his fallen comrade, because it looks like the first Ukrainian soldier did get shot and fell into the trench dead, sadly. Though we can see that the second one here is not backing away, and he's going to face down the Russians regardless if he has any support or not. We can now see a large group of Russians trying to advance. We can see that a grenade rocked near the trench, but didn't land into it, unfortunately. And so this group of Russians remain largely unscathed. We can now see another grenade has exploded within the trench itself. And one thing important to note, we're going to pause this video here, one, to give it a little bit of a breather, and two, to explain something important about trenches. It's very important when you construct a trench that it's not one long, continuous, unbroken line. You always want to make sure that there is some kind of bend or turn regularly within your trenches. This stops grenades, for example, from having their shrapnel travel down the length of the entire trench until they lose their velocity. And that's something that we could see kind of right there. When this grenade exploded, it was met with a break where the trench kind of went upwards into a V shape and back down, and we also saw another break down here, and so the shrapnel was enclosed into a very small area. And for a defender, that's an incredibly good thing, because while a grenade could land in a trench and kill people, it's of course not going to kill as many people if the trench was just in a long, straight, continuous line. And so we're now going to let the video continue. And yes, just for people asking, this is an old video. This is not day 95 news. This is from some previous time, but this is the first time I've ever seen the footage, and so it got put into today's news. Just letting y'all know, just to be certain. We can now see that a firefight is breaking out in the trench in between the Russians and the Ukrainians, but we can't really tell who's the Ukrainian and who's the Russian right now, because they're so close together. If this is not a Ukrainian, apparently. No, wait a minute, that may be a Ukrainian. Okay, all right, so we got the breakdown here. The Russians are down here at the bottom left side of the screen. You can kind of see them there. And here's the Ukrainian up here in this kind of finger off the trench. And there's also another Ukrainian that kind of walked back down the trench, and he went toward what appeared to be a dugout or a bunker that is on this trench. So we can now see the other soldier come back out, and he's now peering back down the trench. And we can see that the Russians have grouped up into this large cackle down here at the end of the trench. It looks like there's 5 guys in one small spot. We can now see that this Ukrainian soldier has taken the moment to run. It looks like there may have been a little bit of a conversation in between the two, where the first man told him to go and run, but I can't really tell. Because you see, he's not, if you look right here, he's not looking towards the Russians, he's looking back towards his friend. And so, you know, y'all are about to see in a second that this man will die, but I think this man literally sacrificed his life to save his friend, and he told him to get out of there while he could, and he would try and hold him off as long as possible. And putting that into context, this makes this even sadder. So I'm going to let the video continue. We can now see that the Russians are trying to push him. We can see him now firing back at the Russians, and bullets bouncing off the ground in every direction as the Russians are trying to pepper him. And soon the Russians will resort to the standard tactic when fighting in a trench, which is to lob grenades at the defenders or the attackers. It's standard practice even in World War I for grenades to have been used to an excessive degree in trench warfare. It's one of the few ways to uproot a defender. We can actually see there for a second that this soldier grabbed one of the grenades that landed into his finger on the trench, and he threw it back at the Russians, and it exploded in midair right there. And so he barely saved himself right there, but he did. Well, you now see the Russians are still trying to lob grenades at this man, and this man is literally wasting this entire squad's inventory of grenades. Each soldier probably carries around 1 or 2 grenades apiece, and over the course of this video, you'll see that they throw around 10 or 12 at him. You can see that he's still throwing grenades back at him. That grenade that just exploded, he had thrown back. But sadly, his luck will run out very soon, as a grenade does land into the finger on his trench and blows up right near him. As you can see right there. You can see that the Russians are still lobbing grenades in the area he once was. But of course, that grenade hit was dead onto him and most likely killed him immediately. At least on the bright side, his death was very quick and it wasn't painful from what we could tell. The grenade exploded right on top of him, and he most likely didn't even have time to register what was happening to him. So luckily, the death looked to be very quick, so that way he didn't have to suffer. But on the unfortunate side, he did, of course, die. But one thing I would like to note is that this soldier does hopefully need to be posthumously awarded some kind of medal for his bravery and heroism, considering that he held off an entire Russian squad for several minutes and allowed his friend to run into safety instead of staying there and also facing down this obviously outmatched battle. They were almost outnumbered, I believe, 5-1, it seems. And so this friend sacrificed his life to make sure that the other one would make it out. And it's a very unfortunate video, but this is war, and it does show you that the Ukrainians do have compassion for each other, even on the field, and that some of them will lay down their lives to make sure that the rest can live. And I think that's one of the most heroic things we've ever seen, and while this isn't Day 95 news, and I usually don't include videos from older times, I had to make sure to include this one, because it was a incredible thing that occurred on video of how brave this man was and how he was willing to lay down his life to save everyone else. And so, much like the rest of the Ukrainians, this man is a hero, and he should be awarded for his bravery on the field. That was one hell of a thing he did. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see that the Ukrainians got the Russians back pretty quickly, and we can see that they bombed a BTR-82. Let me make sure to see if my headset's going to work here.
I don't know who you...
Because for some reason it cut off there for a second, and it's working now. We can now see the BTR-82 there on the ground. We can also see what appears to be a Ural 4320 that may be derelict here on the side. But one thing that was very interesting to me about this clip is I saw another version, but I could never find it again, and it was that one of the Russian soldiers flipped off this drone that's about to bomb this BTR earlier in the day, and they saw it, and they didn't try and shoot it down. They just looked up at it and flipped it off, and now this Ukrainian drone has come back and is going to make sure that their middle fingers are flying off in far enough that they can flip off the Ukrainians miles away. So now we can see the first bomblet being dropped onto the BTR-82 and hitting it on what appears to be the side. It may have hit a fuel tank because we saw a little spurt of an eruption heading towards where the Ural 4320 is. We can now see a second bomblet being dropped onto this BTR, and it looks to have hit the dead back of the vehicle where the infantry compartment is. We can now see the damage that's been inflicted on this BTR-82 in the normal camera, and we can clearly see that the Ural that was here earlier is gone, but this BTR-82 is definitely not in any good shape. Now we can see the Russian, maybe the one who flicked off the drone operator earlier, running out and seeing what happened to his friends. And the fast answer is that they are now well done. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see a multicam view of the BTR being hit. Some of y'all may actually remember this footage from days ago, as we watched American and British volunteers using an RGW, I believe, firing at a Russian BTR. Here in this video, we can actually see 3 different perspectives of the exact same thing unfolding at the same time. And so I wanted to make sure to include this, although it is old news. We've never gotten all 3 perspectives in one place to show multiple different angles. And so here is the video, and it's truly something to see from multiple angles. So we're going to have to keep it muted because it is playing copyrighted music. We can actually see there for a second. Let me rewind that real quick. I thought that was a Freedom of Russia little tab right there, but I don't think it is. You can now see that the music has been removed.
Brian, you lead. Go.
We can now see them advancing to the edge of the tree line to try and get a line of sight on that BTR. Now they've got the music playing again, so we will have to mute it. Now we can see both different perspectives from the helmet cams of what they're doing. We can now see this guy lining up his AT weapon and firing it very soon. We can now see this guy on his helmet cam lining up to fire. He's now fired, and now we've got the drone footage here at the bottom left corner showing the BTR being hit. We can see that it definitely took the hit, and it looks like the driver is trying to get it out of there. And we can see a secondary explosion erupt onto it while it's trying to move away. Now we can see the normal cam that we saw days ago of them trying to withdraw through the tree line. We can now see the BTR sitting there in the trees, and it appears it may have been hit again or had some other kind of ammo detonation occur within the vehicle. Regardless, while it was very close, and it looks like the Russians were almost about to make it out of there, it does appear that the Ukrainians did knock out or kill that tank. And of course, it's great to see that the volunteers, who these Ukrainians actually are of course carrying out great work on the front lines and ensuring that the Russians will pay for every inch of ground they take. And we could see in multiple perspectives here that they certainly did, and we could also see the professionalism of the volunteers. So of course, wonderful to see. I hope we can see more footage like this from multiple angles, because it's very interesting to see, I guess you could say, combat action in general occurring from many different angles, because it gives us a lot of information that you don't really ever see. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see more gear. We can see that the British have now provided a brand new kind of supply vehicle, the Wolfhound. This is something I have really no knowledge of. It appears to be something like an MRAP, but kind of like a pickup truck version of an MRAP, if that makes sense. And so it looks like the video has gone out, so we're going to pause that, go hop on Twitter, close that, and then play it from here. And mute that music. We can see that it has a Browning 50 cal on top of it. We can also see they're using an MG3, which is pretty nice. We can now see what I'm assuming to be volunteers. Or they may be Ukrainians. I can't really tell for certain, but they were moving around. You can see that one of the soldiers driving the Wolfhound has now gotten out. And it looks to be a very well protected vehicle. Appears to have a lot of bulletproof glass. Of course, that's standard on most MRAP kind of vehicles and armored cars. But you can also see that the side armor of the cars themselves seems to be fairly decent. And also, they have I call them armor slats. I know there's a more proper name for them. But the kind of armor grates, slats, mesh that usually breaks up a heat shell if it was fired at that vehicle. We can now see someone filming all of the Wolfhounds that are generally in the same area. And while it is a supply vehicle, according to the caption, we can see that it does have a 50 cal machine gun on top of it, which is pretty decent, actually. I mean, like, that must be one of the most heavily armored supply vehicles that the Ukrainians are fielding right now. And certainly one of the coolest. I mean, like, this thing is cool looking for sure, just looking at it from, like, an aesthetic perspective. Oh my gosh! We can actually see them using it like a mobile... oh, this is going to be way too niche, but I'm going to have to say it anyways. This reminds me a lot of Wagenwaffe, and if you've never heard of Wagenwaffe, it's because it's really obscure and it's from the Hussite Wars. To give a little bit of a brief history, the Hussite Wars was where the Czechs that live in the modern-day Czech Republic were listening to the teachings of a Catholic preacher, I guess you could say, kind of like a priest, Jan Hus. He was saying stuff that the Catholic Church believed to be heresy, and so they burned him at the stake. This eventually pissed off the Czechs, along with a couple of other things that the Catholics did to them, that they rose up, and this was before Martin Luther, but they rose up against the Catholics, and they started to fight them, and surprisingly, they won. And one of the things that they did in this war that was one of the strategies that led them to win was called Wagenwaffe, and this was where they'd take horse-drawn wagons, and they would either get inside of them, and they would shoot arquebuses from inside of these wagons over the top. And so really, knights, cavalry, or anything like that couldn't really attack them all too well. And these small little wagons were too difficult for the pikemen to attack as well. And so pretty much they were impregnable as far as the strategy was going at the time. And so when the Catholic forces would go up against these proto-Protestants, pretty much, inside of these wagons, they would just get slaughtered, and there was really no way for them to get back at them. And I feel like this is the modern-day version of Wagenwaffe here in action, as we can see them all sitting in the back of this Wolfhound and firing into the distance at Russian forces as it just slowly moves down the road. This is probably one of the coolest things I've seen as well, is it's literally a drive-by shooting. And we can now see the 50 cal being operated on top of the turret as well. So very interesting to see, and it's wonderful to know that the Wolfhound is being used, and it's good to know that the British are providing new kinds of equipment to the Ukrainians on a regular basis. We're now going to move on to the next bit of news, where we can see that civilians are using drones to see where a safe place is to evacuate. So let me show y'all this video. It's incredibly interesting, and it's also showing that the Ukrainians go above and beyond to try and ensure that their civilians stay as safe as possible, even while trying to evacuate them, which is a dangerous situation in itself. And so here's the video.
Групу, яка вивозила з оточених міст людей, які потребували невідкладної допомоги. Там десь ногу відірвало, там ще щось.
Сюда? А на задню?
Кажу, давай ми тобі зробимо перше. Ми подивимося дронами, щоб не було рядом ДРГ якоїсь, чи взагалі Збройних сил Російської Федерації. Ми хотіли розвідати ті місця, де є небезпека. Заїхали в Чернігів все-таки, значить, забрали тяжкохворих, забрали там бабушку, яка вже там з ногою, з проблемною, значить, забрали тільки сидячих змогли, тому що тільки 2 машини дійшло, треба було повертатись. Значить, вивезли їх з обласної лікарні в Куликівку. Дуже
Oh, gotta mute this part, so I'll just read off the captions at the bottom. It's very important when you plan a humanitarian mission to understand where the enemy is, that you may or may not have reached an agreement with. Because we see that Russia doesn't fulfill its obligations, that it takes upon itself and it attacks both civilians and the military, not to mention ceasefires. And when you try to reach an agreement with such an enemy that doesn't fulfill its obligations on providing safe passage for civilians, then you need to control it, what it can do, drones of different types can help with this task. If there is no chance of neutralizing without losses, you need to record that there is danger there. If a green corridor for civilians is ongoing, then you need to loudly if it was agreed on, or quietly if it hasn't been agreed, to keep up this corridor and control these locations so we can overcome this danger. So drones are very important for rescuing troops and civilians. And with that, that's the end of the video, and we can see that the Ukrainian territorial defense forces are going above and beyond to ensure that their evacuation operations are as safe as possible and making sure that they're not putting civilians in harm's way. And that goes to show you how much care the Ukrainians actually have for their people, unlike the Russians who just throw their soldiers into meat grinders, and they also execute civilians that are in occupied territories. So, great to see that the Ukrainians do have a lot of compassion and always make sure to go the extra mile in caring for their civilians. And with that, we're on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see the antithesis of Mr. Lunchtime. Mr. Lunchtime has been a character on this channel ever since he was introduced, and the jokes have never died down, and honestly, they're pretty funny. Here we can see the antithesis of Mr. Lunchtime. We actually found a Ukrainian version of Mr. Lunchtime today, and I would have to say, this man looks to be the jolliest, most calm, and pretty neat guy to hang out with. Here is Mr. Peacetime. Mr. Peacetime here, while being a little large. I can't really blame him, though, of course, but still, he does have a very peaceful look about him, and also the cat is a fine addition. And so, while we have Mr. Lunchtime, I want to welcome Mr. Peacetime to the table as the opposite of Mr. Lunchtime. I would actually love to hang out with Mr. Peacetime. He looks like a pretty cool dude. And so hopefully, when I go over to Ukraine and give Starsky the shirt and also hang out there after the victory, maybe I can meet Mr. Peacetime and hang out with him. He looks like a cool dude. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see some fallen heroes. Both of these soldiers did die in the field of combat. Their names were Ole and Dmitro Zibris. They were both brothers, and they lost their lives on May 19th of this war, about 10 days ago. One of the brothers, Ole, was 47 years old, and Dmitro was 39. They volunteered to defend the country on the first day of the war, and they've left behind 2 wives and 4 children, ages 17, 15, 10, and 9. While it's an unfortunate story, I do hope that their families understand that their sacrifice was in the defense of their country, and they died defending their families. And I hope that these men are recognized as heroes from then on, and local heroes that deserve a high amount of praise for stepping up and defending the country when they had the option to turn around and run away. And that's one thing that always everyone has to keep in mind, is that there is nothing that compels the Ukrainians to fight. The Ukrainians could turn around and start trying to run for the Polish border anytime they wanted to if fear overtook them. Yet, we don't see that happening. Not a single very few soldiers actually, there's been a small amount, but very few soldiers ever take the decision to retreat, back down, or surrender to the Russians. And so I have to say that this is, of course, another example of Ukrainian heroism, and while it's an unfortunate one, it is still one that I think is important to note. So with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see a very sweet little video. I wanted to make sure to add in some lighter stuff tonight, so that way we could make sure not to keep this too demure or sad. And we can see Katie the Husky. Katie the Husky apparently was picked up by some Ukrainian soldiers, and it refused to leave them ever, and so has now become the pet and the mascot of the unit. So let's check out this sweet dog. Also, I'm going to unmute this video, although it does have music in it, and I will take the hit if it is a copyrighted song. So here's the video.
Иди, хороший, заходи, 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 заходи. Заходи, иди сюда, хорошая, иди. Сейчас, иди сюда, иди. Пойдет или нет? Да.
What a sweet dog. I actually had a husky when I was a kid. And they were very sweet. I love huskies. They're very nice.
Заходи. Кейти, ты как? Что, поедем, да? Кейти. Хорошая. Що? Друзі, запрошую до себе додому. Евакуювали з міста Мар'їнки собаку на прізвисько Кеті. Вона до нас сіла в машину. Прийшлося її з собою забрати, бо вона дуже в нас соціальне животне. Батьки мої поселили в себе і люди допомогли з кормом. З обслуговуванням її у ветеринарній клініці. Батькам моїм велика шана за це. Бо собака заслугує на більше, ніж війна у місті Мар'їнки.
І лапу дає, і повзає, да?
Да, на косинці дівчата наші порозписувались, залишили свої автографи, ті, які її обслуговували у ветеринарній клініці та надавали корм для неї. Як закінчиться війна, ми передамо її власникам. Це компанійський друг та справжній товариш.
And that's the end of the video. And it was a very sweet little video about this husky. You can see that at the beginning it was pretty sad and it looked very, very down in the dumps. But as the video went on, we could see that it got pretty happy and was having a really good time. And so it looks like the Ukrainian soldiers were able to shed a little bit of light on this dog's day and let it have a pretty fun time. And so this dog is now with that unit and it travels around with them wherever they go. And so I hope it stays in the best of health, has the funnest of times, and that the Ukrainians can keep its spirits up because the poor thing looked like it had gone through a lot. Also, we're going to be talking about something I just looked over for the first time during this entire stream at my screen, and we will be touching on that here in a second. Don't worry, everyone. We've got 3 more points to go, and then the hype train will begin about what I just saw on screen. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, and we can see the Ukrainian soldier has fallen in love with one of the weirdest of things. Sadly, it'll never love him back, but like some relationships, I believe it'll be largely explosive and very ballistic. We can see the soldier under a camouflaged net trying to woo a missile. I think that soldier has a thing for rockets, and hopefully he's better than his last relationship. Hopefully his last one wasn't, of course, ballistic or anything like that, or very explosive. And so with that, that's all I've got to point out on that. It was just a funny video, and we're going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we see the Ukrainians are finding out that there is a new kind of doormat out there on the market, and they found that Russian flags make for perfect doormats. Here we can see the Ukrainians cleaning off their boots, and considering that they're in a dirt field, I think they're going to have to do this every few feet or so. So hopefully this Russian flag becomes brown, and it becomes the flag of doo-doo, in a way. And so with that, of course, great to see. And we can see that this is most likely a TDF because some of their equipment is mismatched, but at the same time, it does look to be of a pretty good standard. And so, with that, we're now going to move on to our last bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see Ukrainian T-84s on the front lines. We see very few of these, and there are, of course, a small number of these actually on the front lines. But we can see here a Ukrainian sitting on top of his T-84 taking a picture with it, and we can see another picture of a T-84 actually in use and most likely firing at Russian forces. Once again, you can always tell Ukrainian vehicles apart, sometimes because they actually have this red cross, not the red cross of the, like, international Red Cross, but they kind of have a red, I don't really know how to describe it. I guess I would call it a Germanic cross on the side that has the Ukrainian emblem on it. And they also have the digital camouflage pattern, which the Russians do not have. So if you ever want to try and identify a Russian in a Ukrainian tank and there's no Z's on it, that kind of camouflage pattern will give it away as to whose side that vehicle belongs to. And so with that, we have now reached the end of the location unknown news and also the international news. We're now going to start moving on towards the Kharkiv and Severodonetsk area, but before we do, I think we have massive news for Matthew to tell us. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
And Enforcer, we do have quite some big news. We have already smashed the donation goal for the night, and we're only 40 minutes into the stream. We're at $5.2 thousand on the donations. So we have smashed the goal, but that doesn't mean you still cannot donate. Still feel free to put in money to Ukraine to help Razom, and that will definitely go a long way to helping those on the ground in Ukraine.
And I do have to agree as well. If you would like to support, just because we reached the goal doesn't mean you can no longer support the fundraiser. You still can. But the one reason I did make the fundraiser goal a little bit low tonight is because I wanted to make sure that everyone who was kind of getting a little stretched with these fundraisers could have a well-needed break and not really feel like they were obligated to throw everything they had at the fundraiser every single week. But let's go, everyone. We've reached the 5,000 goal, and we've even gotten a $200 extra on top of it in the meantime. And so, once again, everyone, congratulations. This is incredible. I can't believe that every single time the Lee Spring Army sets out a goal, we reach that goal and then go beyond it. I think that's something incredible. Of course, it is a huge testament to our community of great Lee Spring Army soldiers, and I have to say, I have never been as proud of doing anything in my life as I have been running this channel and, of course, reporting this news. And so, I thank you all so much once again for pulling through and making sure that we could reach this wonderful goal. I believe this puts the total of funds that we've raised up to around 280,000, if I'm correct, but I'll have to go back through and crunch those numbers here and see if that is the case. But still, incredible, and I am more than proud of every single one of y'all. So thank you all once again, and give yourselves a huge round of applause, because this kind of stuff no other community has been able to do. I saw that on Reddit, it made it to the front page of the Ukraine subreddit that someone had managed to raise $8,000 over 3 days for tourniquets and other kind of medical gear. And something that, like, when I looked at that, I was like, what? I was like, we raised like 30,000 in one night sometimes, like over 2 hours. And I was like, how come the Lee Spring Army isn't getting any credit? But I did see that someone did put out a Reddit post on one of the subreddits that I frequent about this channel. And I have to say, whoever did that, I saw it, and that was really nice of you. And also, there was a bunch of great comments below it as well, which made me feel pretty good. So thank you all once again for enjoying this channel. And also, thank you so much for helping us to be as great as we are. And so with that, we're now going to recognize our largest donors, and we're also going to answer a few people's questions. And now, pretty much for the rest of the night, we are going to be on cruising mode. We don't have to worry about reaching the fundraiser goal. We've already done that. We're going to just go through here and cover the news, but it's not going to be as pressured as I feel most times of trying to hype this thing up, because we already reached the goal and there was no hype needed. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
And real quick, I just want to say to everybody in the chat that's saying that they may not be able to donate at the moment, we appreciate the consideration anyway, and it's totally understandable. You can't donate every single Sunday in some instances, but just the mere fact that you're thinking about donating lets us know that your heart is in the right place. So thank you for just having the thought of donating, and we totally understand if you can't. So before we recognize our donors here, let me get that pulled up. There we go. So our top donors of the night, we have a $150 donation from Tim Q, a $111 donation from Nick J, a $110 donation from Louise Francois Lapointe, and then we have several $100 donations. We have one from Andrew Coster, John Petrie, Scott, Dadgood, Mike Croft, Michael Companitz, James Newland, and then we have an $86 donation from Junebug72, and then we have several $50 donations. We have one from Stop the BS, Smokey Valdez, Pale Rider, Kubato King, Momcat Max, Shannon Alaminsky, John Webster, Gegris 3N, John in New Hampshire, Thomas Irving. Then we have one from David Krepp, B. Baldy, Jazz Craffen, I think, hopefully. Then we have a $50 donation from Sleeping Piranha. And thank you very much to all of you for your very generous donations. And thank you to everybody that put in smaller donations as well, because those have gotten us up to $5.5 thousand on our fundraiser at this point.
And I have to say, I'm more than blown away once again. I went through the massive speech before, and I won't bore y'all with that one again, but I have to say, I thank you all so much. We've done more than anyone has ever imagined is possible. This channel, and now I'm going into it a long aside, but I guess I will. This channel started off with 81 subscribers, and we're now sitting at 65,000 subscribers nearly, and we've raised nearly $300,000 for Ukraine. And that's and when you think about how far this has gone over the matter of just a few months, it's honestly incredible to me to think about the journey that I've taken and a lot of y'all have taken with me. A lot of y'all have been around for a really long time. Maybe a couple of thousand of y'all who are on here tonight. And y'all have seen how this channel has developed, all of the things that have happened, all of the guest stars we've had. Y'all have been here through everything. And so I hope this journey has been as fun, interesting. It's had its sad times, its great times, its happy times that I've been through as well. And so with that, we're now going to move on to answer a couple of people's questions, and then we're going to return to the Kharkiv and Northern Donbass news. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
So before we get to our live chat questions, and by the way, we don't have super chats tonight because it is a donation night, and we were able to get that issue fixed this time, so there's no confusion. However, we were a little late in starting the donation tonight, so we did have one super chat sneak in before we started it, and it is from Ryan Miller, who puts in a $2 donation and says, $1 a day to keep the orcs at bay, $1 more, double tap.
Well, thank you very much for the support. Of course, any amount of support always helps out this channel. Of course, it's the fundraiser night, so it's not like I'm asking for people to support the channel. This is the night that we support Ukraine, but I do thank you so much for the support. And it's, of course, great to hear that $1 a day does keep the orcs away. So with that, I thank you so much for the support. And we're now going to move on to everyone's general questions. Tonight is that night. You don't have to send in a super chat to have a question answered. You just have to @Enforcer or @EnforcerMatt with your question, and we will try and answer it if we can. And so with that, what questions do we have?
So first up, we have a question from one of our channel regulars, Duncan VR, who says, my question is, do you think Russia will soon be bringing out its T-18 light tanks to send them to the front line?
Let me pull that one up real quick. I actually don't know about the T-18 light tank. So let me pull that one up. Oh, okay. Now I know what you're talking about. Yep. This is like Russia's first tank, isn't it? I think it is, if I'm correct. I think they may. Now that I know what you're talking about, I think they might. This wouldn't be too far-fetched. We already know that the Russians have been pulling out Maxim machine guns and Mosin Nagants, and this is about from the same time frame. So, give it about a month. I think they will be there. So I hope that answers the question, and with that, we're on to the next one.
And real quick, I just want to make a note so nobody gets frustrated. We are having an issue with the Nightbot once again, and specifically William Harris. I did get your question, even though Nightbot deleted it for whatever reason. So please bear with us on that. I'm going to try to check into why it is still randomly deleting comments. It's not supposed to do that. So next up, we have a question from Railroad22, who says, are you all aware some of media was reporting today that Russia was making major advancements?
Yes, I do know about that. Of course, one thing I always like to note is that some people come on here. I don't know if you're trying to do that, and I'm assuming you're not. You're just asking if I knew about that. But there are some people who come through here and they assume I'm one of the people who go with a click. And what I mean by that is that I go and look at what mainstream news is saying and then I try and parrot it. I don't ever go and watch anyone's YouTube channels on the Ukraine war. Never. Because if I do that, my thoughts and my analysis is then going to be tainted by what they think. And it could be wrong. And so then I'm sitting there and I'm going off of something like that, like they've made huge progress, although my news hasn't shown that at all today. And then I sit here and come on stream and I just repeat what they say. So while I did hear that kind of in my peripheral, I didn't actually pay much attention to it because I just go and do my own data gathering and information collection, and I didn't see that. And that's another interesting thing to me, is that saved my butt at the beginning of this war. At the beginning of this war, I never watched anyone's news on this stuff. Of course, I was literally spending like 16 hours a day back then trying to get this thing together because I was just starting off at it, had no idea how to streamline the process, and so it was literally all day long, every day. And so I never had time to look at anyone's news, and so I would just go off of what my I guess, learnings in history was to kind of come up with my analysis of what was going to happen. And so while I was saying at the beginning of this war, and not a lot of people believed me at the start, that the Ukrainians were actually going to be able to push the Russians back out of the northeastern area, everyone else in the world, including almost everyone on YouTube, was saying that the Russians were going to pull everything together and steamroll the Ukrainians within the next few days, and then that became weeks, and then that became a month, and then the Russians withdrew because they lost. So I actually did hear about it, but I never let that weigh in on my judgment, because I look at stuff and I just analyze it for myself and come up with my own opinions in a way. So I hope that answers the question. And I think that that's something very important for a lot of people to do, is while it is good to, of course, listen to my shows and also like other news and stuff, always make sure to try and come up with your own conclusions if you see that there may be a flaw in what people are saying. Like, for example, if they have no basis to actually say that something's going to be a certain way, don't really listen to that and just take it for granted. Go and do a lot of research on your own. And so with that, I hope that answers the question, and we're going to move on to the next one.
Okay, and real quick, I have to recognize two very large donations. We have a $500 donation from Steve2848, and we also have a $100 donation from DJ Bonebreaker.
Well, good Lord. Steve! Hey, welcome, Steve. Steve has supported this channel a very large amount over the past few days, and I thank you so much, once again, for supporting Ukraine itself. I just noticed that with you and DJ Bonebreaker and everyone else's super chats, for example, Mark Hackney's $10, we've gotten up to 6.2. 6.2! We are already $1.2 thousand over our $5,000 goal for tonight, which is incredible. And so with that, I thank you all so much for helping out this fundraiser again, and I thank you so much, Steve, for coming in with the big bucks. That is the largest amount of support that anyone's given to the fundraiser tonight. And so with that, we're going to move on to our last question of this little segment, and then we're going to move on to the Kharkiv and Northern Donbass news.
All right, and the last question of this segment goes to Sweet Cheeks, who says, are there any soldiers left in the Azov steel factory?
I'm not really sure. I haven't gotten any news about them as of late, and so I'm assuming that they may have surrendered, because there's nothing coming out of Mariupol anymore rather than aftermath videos and stuff like that. So I'm assuming that they did, although I don't have any information to go off of there. I heard that some of them were still in the Azovstal, and that's the last bit of news I got, but that was around a week or a week and a half ago. So I hope I could answer that question the best I can, but I generally have a lack of information about what's happened to that last group of Azovstal defenders. And so with that, we have now reached the end of this question segment. So everyone who hates the question segments that leaves, welcome back. We are back to the news, and we're now going to continue on in the Kharkiv area. Starting off today, we can see that the Ukrainians are using the M777s near Kharkiv, just like they are on every single other part of the front lines. It looks like this post is gone, but of course the shells that landed on the Russian forces are not, and their pain is still being felt to this very minute. We're now going to move down into Kharkiv itself, where we can see a very rare appearance where Zelensky has traveled out of Kyiv. Zelensky has actually visited Kharkiv today and reviewed the soldiers and also handed out some medals. Here's one of the videos of him handing out the awards to the Ukrainian soldiers.
Служу українському народу.
Служу українському народу.
Хочу подякувати кожній з вас за вашу велику службу, ваше життя, за те, що не жалієте своє життя заради нашої держави. Дякую за захист незалежності нашої держави. Бережіть себе. Слава Україні!
Oh my god, the Russians have got to be seething right now. And here's why. The leader of Ukraine, the man they've literally sent units to go into Kyiv and try and kill, just arrived 20 miles away from the front lines near Kharkiv, handed out some medals, reviewed the troops, and then left. And they had no clue what was happening, didn't commit any attacks against them. And secondly, it's showing how confident Zelensky is in the defense of Kharkiv and also the situation in the front line surrounding it, that he would actually go to Kharkiv and actually review the soldiers and give out medals and awards there. And that is something of note as well. And it's showing the confidence that Zelensky and the government of Ukraine now has with how this war is going. And so while the situation may be a little precarious down here in the northern Donbass area, apparently Zelensky and the government as a whole are very confident in their situation right now. And that's why for the first time today, Zelensky actually traveled out of Kyiv, and he once again traveled as close as he could to the battleground. So with that, I have to say that Zelensky, of course, is a very brave person for actually traveling out of Kyiv. I'm not sure how he made it down to Kharkiv. I'm assuming that he most likely just took a car. Of course, taking an aircraft down there would be very dangerous, so I'm thinking he most likely just took a car. But that is still wild to me that he has traveled so far from Kyiv, because Kyiv is a total of 250 miles away. That's a long distance, and he covered that entire distance, arrived in Kharkiv, and left alive. And that tells you how bad the Russians are off and how confident the Ukrainians are in their military. With that, we're now going to move down the entirety of the front line. Nothing has happened at Chuhiv or Balaklia, and we're now going to move down to the area of Izium, where today we've seen... And I'm sorry, one second, I would like to note this real quick. I'm sorry if I do yawn. I actually did yawn right there. I actually forgot to drink coffee tonight, and so I'm kind of living off of my raw energy instead of caffeine. So just bear with me on that, because if I do yawn, just know it's not because I'm bored or something. It's literally because I'm about to die. But I'm going to keep doing this news because the news doesn't stop, the war doesn't stop, and I won't stop. And so here we can see the Ukrainians setting up an anti-mine net on the Seversky Donets River, and then getting attacked by artillery probably an hour after they left, because we had no evidence of Ukrainian forces near that area. So we can see the van that the Ukrainians are taking. We can now see them moving the boat down towards the river. And we can now see them trying to set up this anti-mine net. And some of y'all may be wondering, what is an anti-mine net? Well, it's literally just a shark net, pretty much. They set this thing up across the river, and the principle is that if there are mines floating down this river, they're going to be caught in the net, instead of being caught on the shoreline where they might get hidden by sediment, and then, you know, like 2 years or 3 years later, or even just like a week later, someone steps on top of that thing, or a vehicle drives over it, and the thing explodes and kills people. So that's kind of the whole entire intent behind the anti-mine net, is to catch them before they can float even further downstream and eventually onto the shore, or the banks of the river. So we can see the boat still putting across and trying to set up this net. And we now see the drone zooming out and showing us where this is. And in this next video, we can see that the van is gone. We have no evidence of the van being anywhere. We can't really see the anti-mine net. And we don't see any Ukrainians around whatsoever. But we see this one large explosion in the water that's from a Russian artillery shell. And the Russians are trying to paint the picture that they're actually hitting the Ukrainians. But we don't see any of them. We can now see another explosion, and there's no Ukrainians around. We don't see the van, we don't see the boat, we don't see the soldiers. I mean, like, hell, we don't even see the anti-mine net in this video. With that, that's the end of the video, but we can see right there that once again, the Russians are trying to come up with some kind of fodder to feed people and let them know that, that the Russians are doing something, although they are doing absolutely nothing. So with that, we're now going to move on out of the Izium area, because that's literally all the Russians have done there today on video, which was nothing. And we're now going to start moving down towards the area of Lyman. Here in the area of Lyman, The Russians, of course, have been committing their usual MLRS attacks against the Ukrainians in an attempt to uproot them from their positions. I'm sorry about that, y'all, but here we can see the footage of multiple tornado MLRSs firing at the Ukrainians. Interesting. I wonder if those rockets ever actually do any good. Because for the amount of times we've seen Russian MLRSs firing over the course of this war, we've never actually seen them, you know, at least on video, hitting their targets or ever actually making any kind of progress, which is interesting to me. The Ukrainians, on the other hand, are always showing that their artillery is creating some kind of progress or headway, but the Russians are never able to get together the proof for that. So that's interesting to me. So with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news, further and closer near Lyman, where we can see a Russian column heading in the direction of Lyman and Slovyansk. Here's that video. Hi. Gotta mute it. But here we can see Tiger armored cars making their way down this dirt road. And note that this is a dirt road. This is something that's very important to mention because a lot of my Western viewers, much from like Western Europe and America, are going to assume that there's a pretty decent amount of paved roads, especially if you're from where I am, in Alabama. There's almost nothing but paved roads. But over in Ukraine, it's very important to mention that there are a lot of dirt roads still, and that will hinder the Russians if there is any kind of rainfall or during the Rasputitsa season, as their armored columns cannot operate on these dirt roads, and they're going to have to operate on the paved highways, which there are very few of, and it's going to create a lot of bottlenecking and a lot of problems for their offensives. We can see even now with the Rasputitsa season being over, they are having massive problems carrying out offensives, even when the terrain is to their advantage as well as the weather. With that, that is the end of that video, but we can see that the Russians are still moving forces towards the Lyman and Slovyansk area. Right now, the front line has not moved according to our information over the past 24 hours. It appears that the Ukrainians' defensive positions near Dubrova and right outside of Lyman are holding, and they may be able to hold those for quite some while. Of course, if they ever fall back, they will have a perfectly defensible position on the Seversky Donets River, as a river crossing is incredibly dangerous for the Russians to attempt. We've already seen them try twice, and both times the bridge crossings were destroyed, along with about 2 BTGs each. So, with that in mind, I don't really think they'll be trying to cross the Seversky Donets River, even if they are able to push the Ukrainians back to it. We're now going to move on into the Severodonetsk and Lysychansk area, which we've actually had a smaller amount of news of today than normal. I'm not really sure why, but we do have some information to show that there has been some bombing in Lysychansk committed by the Russians. Of course, there's copyrighted music, but here we can see in this film that there has been a decent amount of damage to this area. A large amount of debris is spread out on the ground. We can see that one of the buildings may have been hit directly by some kind of munition, although we really can't tell. Actually, no, we can definitely tell. There's a massive crater there. We can now see that in the basement area of this building, there's also been an extensive amount of damage as well. And we can see some, what appears to be bunk beds that were down there that appear to have been heavily destroyed as well. Interesting to see, and it does show that the Russians are indiscriminately bombing both Severodonetsk and Lysychansk through artillery and also normal bombs, as we can see over and over again that they are attacking areas that aren't even on the front line. While Lysychansk is close to the front lines, it actually isn't on it. Severodonetsk is. So with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news down here towards Bila Ora, where we can see that the Chechens were rattled today. The Chechens always trying to look like cool dudes until they're not. Here we can see in this video that the Chechen Rosguardia, which is the Russian version of the National Guard, came under fire today, and immediately their pants went from multicam to brown. So here's the video. We can now see the worried expression on the press man's face, which is probably reflected across the entirety of the Chechens right now. But they're not going to show you their faces because if you looked at them, it will look like that brand new Snapchat filter where it makes you look like you're in raw anguish.
Обратно.
Давай. Алло.
So now you see the video looping over, but you can see that the Chechens were hit incredibly hard, and they did freak out a little bit. So great to see that the Chechens aren't the invincible and fearless forces they make themselves out to be. They look to be like scared little kids, just like we saw in Mariupol. We're now going to move off the front line, and we're now going to move into the area behind Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, where we can see an unfortunate video that the Russians have hit one of the brand new FH-70 artillery pieces that was provided by the Italians. Usually, most of the time, I dog on Russian videos and say that's largely untrue, but we can see the FH-70s here in this video, and then we can see the artillery coming down on top of them. We can now see one of the shells land right in between them, and we can see some of the ammo stowages behind the FH-70 on the right catch on fire and begin to explode. So, while unfortunate, we do know that the Ukrainians are getting a steady and constant supply of artillery from all Western nations, and hopefully they can recoup these losses, and the losses are nothing too significant or severe for them. I'm not really sure why these artillery pieces came under fire. I didn't actually see any crew near them that we can see on video. So I'm not really sure what's going on here, but we did see two of them get destroyed, which is unfortunate. And so with that, we're now going to move down to the miracle that everyone's been wondering about, the miracle that everyone clicked on this video to see. A lot of people have been wondering, what is this title about? Ukraine has a miracle. You know, isn't Ukraine a miracle in itself, since it survived 3 months' time, and even it's going well beyond that now? Well, the answer is that Ukraine is a miracle, simply for the fact that they have now opened up the T1302 Highway again, and they pushed the Russians back. They did it. The vital highway will stay open. The Ukrainians managed to conduct a small counterattack against one of Russia's strongest offenses over the course of the past few days, and have managed to push them back a few miles and make sure that the T1302 Highway will not be in jeopardy of being overrun by Russian forces and subsequently cutting off the major artery that is keeping Severodonetsk and Lysychansk supplied with the weapons and the aid that it needs to keep running. So this is great news. This, of course, gives the Ukrainians a large amount of breathing room where they can sit there and think about their defenses by and large, and not really have to worry about a situation like this threatening the entirety of their eastern side of this front line. So great to see. Of course, if you would like to see this link and read about it yourself, you can click on the link in the description below of the Day 95 map, and it will take you to this exact map with all the markers on it, and you can take a look at it for yourself and see in detail what it's talking about. But the Ukrainians did push the Russians back, and so, incredible news. We're now going to move on to our last bit of news from the northern Donbass area in the city of Bakhmut, where today we've seen that a school has been destroyed in a barrage by the Russians. As you can see in this picture here, the Russians target everything they can, and it keeps on looking like they deliberately target schools to destroy them. This is something actually that I was thinking about today, and I was like, you know, that's usually been the usual complaint of governments and militaries around the world. If you look at Vietnam, the North Vietnamese always said every time the Americans bombed anything that they had just hit a school. And so I was thinking, what if the Ukrainians are doing the same thing? But the thing is that they aren't, because unlike the Vietnamese, the Ukrainians always have proof that that a school has been hit, and so it's clear evidence, and we have multiples of examples of this over and over again. Nearly everywhere the Russians have gone, they have gone out of their way to destroy the schools, and we can see another example here as they've destroyed the school in Bakhmut through an artillery barrage. I think it's sickening. I bet a lot of y'all can agree. But this is what their usual, I guess you could say, mode of operation is. And so with that, we have now reached the end of the Kharkiv and northern Donbass news as well. And so we're going to move on to recognize our top donors in between these last few bits, and then we're going to answer a few questions from the chat and continue on with our Southern Front news and wrap up with a speech from Zelensky, answer a few more questions, and then round out the stream. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, and we are currently sitting at 6.9 thousand on the donations, so we are exactly 1.9 thousand over goal. So tremendous. We actually just hit 7,000 while I was speaking just then. We had a $100 donation come in from Gooch Booch. Thank you very much. And also, let me recognize a couple of our other top donors here. We have a $50 donation from Bench Press, Fecklar7, Anna May, and Inna. And thank you to everybody else that helped us get to that $7,000 figure. And that is our top donors for the moment.
And I've got to say, I thank you all so much once again. As it's honestly incredible that we're nearly 50% over the initial $5,000 goal. So thank you all so much once again. Y'all have incredibly kind hearts. We've already reached the goal, but that's not stopped anyone from donating. And of course, I'm not discouraging y'all from donating. If you would like to support Razom, please make sure to throw in a little bit of a donation for them, because it goes a long way and it helps out Ukrainian soldiers who have been fighting valiantly for the past 3 months. So with that, we're on to the questions.
All right, and on to the questions. We have another question from Duncan VR, who says, question for you, Enforcer. Do you think this war could drag on for several years or end in a few months?
That's a tough one, you see, because the thing is that the war is starting to drag into a stalemate. And one thing that we do know is that back in 2014, when the Donbass war went on for quite some while, it went on for like 2 years or so. Once it reached 2016, those front lines had stabilized where they are in black, and the Ukrainians and the DPR and LPR went to a stalemate. And I feel like, honestly, it could turn out being like this here. The only thing that makes me think that that wouldn't be the case and this war will be over in months is that the sanctions that the world has levied on Russia are crippling their economy to measures that no one even knows. It's so bad that we would actually have to be in there looking at it to see how terrible things have gotten. And that's one reason why I think the war will end in months, is because due to the high Russian losses, along with the economic troubles they're having right now, it wouldn't be in their advantage to try and drag this war on into a stalemate, because there's just really no advantage to them in that. Also, the Ukrainians are getting a large amount of economic and military support from the West, which is keeping their economy bolstered, because while the Ukrainians are winning, that's not to say that the Ukrainian economy is in jeopardy. Of course, when any country goes to war, their economy starts to slowly degrade. And that's something that I know is happening in Ukraine, and that's why a large amount of the aid that the United States sends over, for example, the $40 billion, nearly $30 billion of it is assigned to other things, and a decent amount of them are economic in purpose. And so with that, I hope that answers the question. Honestly, to answer in a very clear way, I think the war will only last a few more months and will most likely be over by the end of this year. And so with that, I hope I answered the question, and we're on to the next one.
And before we move on, let me recognize a $50 donation from A Train. And thank you to everybody else who is now donating. We are now up to $7.2 thousand. I think we actually might reach 10,000, even though the goal was only 5,000. So that's pretty cool. But let's see here while I get my questions pulled back up. Our next question is from Scott Sharwood, who says, Enforcer, why is Germany not delivering their promised heavy artillery and tanks to Ukraine?
From what I know, they're still training the Ukrainians in Germany on the Panzerhaubitze 2000, and I think that's why they haven't been sent over yet. That's because the crews, in their minds, are not ready. So I think that's the best answer I could give, and I thank you very much for it. It's a very It's a very good question, and I think that's about all the news and information I'd have to back that up with. And so with that, we're going to move on to the last question of this segment. Then we're going to continue on to the southern Donbass news, the rest of the southern front, and wrap up with the speech from Zelensky. And so, what do we got?
And up next, we have a question from Rez Mash, who says, Enforcer, why doesn't the grain get shipped through Romania? I assume some of the bridges and rail lines are destroyed.
I think they are destroyed, but one reason why they're not going through Romania, really honestly, I was going to try and answer that, but when I started thinking about that there and for that split second, I really don't have an answer why that wouldn't happen. I know that they're saying that wheat is actually going to be transported by train into Poland, and then they're going to transport it from Poland to Egypt. And honestly, when you said that, I was like, I don't know why that isn't the case, because I was thinking, isn't there a land route from Ukraine to Egypt by rail? And there is, there should be. So I don't know why they're not doing that. So I thank you for the question. That's actually racking my brain. I'll try and get an answer to that one because that's actually a pretty interesting question. And so, unfortunately, I'm going to have to declare ignorance on it and say I can't answer it due to a lack of information on my end. But with that, we've now reached the end of this question segment. If you would like to ask a question and have it answered by me, or Enforcer Matt, which is very rare. Usually he just throws them over to me. Make sure to @Enforcer or @Enforcer Matt, and he will make sure to take a look at that question and try and put it down in the queue. While we can't answer all of them, we will try and answer as many as we can. So with that, we're now back to the news. Here in the Donbass area today, in the southern Donbass near Donetsk, we can see that the Ukrainians ambushed a Russian convoy today. It appears that they used a combination of IEDs with small arms to try and take this convoy out, but it does appear that the lead vehicle made it through. And that is the end of the video. Very interesting to see, but there's not really much to comment on. The video is pretty self-explanatory. We're now going to move on down into the area in the general Donetsk area, but I wasn't really able to nail down a specific spot. But we can see that the Ukrainian reporter did come under fire today. I will, of course, read at what is at the bottom of the screen, since y'all won't be able to see that. I do not believe. I'm not really sure. But I will make sure to read this. And also turn it up a little bit so that way y'all can hear it. People fled under shelling with no tires, ignoring their punctured wheels. They drove only to get out. The villages... ... Something is humming above our heads. There's a rocket. Wait a second. There. They're firing right at our position. Well, you're hearing the state of our situation here. Something else is humming.
Це околиця Бахмута, і тут, власне, ось така війна.
And that is the end of the video. You can see that press reporter, of course, got incredibly worried. Understandably. I mean, like, he's in Bakhmut, which isn't even close to the front lines yet, and then they come under shelling. So he was a little stressed, but he actually kept his cool and kept on reporting, which was really impressive to me. And so, very interesting to see. And it does show that the Russians may have even been targeting that reporter directly or the same spot twice. We're now going to move even further down the Donetsk area, and we're now going to reach our last bit of news today, where we can see Russian forces being shelled in the area of Marinka. The Ukrainians, of course, do hold on to Marinka, so I believe that this may be a mistitle, but this may be in the Marinka area. So here's the video. As we see, the artillery is raining down on Russian positions near the vehicles, and we see the soldiers trying to run to safety. Well, we know that anything downrange of our Ukrainian artillery is not safe. We can now see a small fireworks show. We can now see the Ukrainians double tapping the area. It looks like they're making the U.S. in the early 2010s and also the late 2000s very proud. And that is the end of the video. Great to see that the Ukrainians, of course, are blasting the Russians and making sure that they don't get it easy, because we do know that the Russians have been trying to obliterate Ukrainian units with the amount of artillery fire that they're levying against them, but at the same time, it looks like they're not really having it easy either, as the Ukrainians are ensuring that they, too, will be obliterated. So with that, we're now going to move a little bit further down, and we're going to move into the Mariupol area. We only have one bit of news from Mariupol. The news that comes out of there is very seldom and very few, but today we did have an unfortunate video of a grieving man in front of a destroyed home. Who knows what's causing him pain? There's a million things that you could imagine to make this man weep like he is. But I wanted to show this video because it reminds me, and hopefully it reminds everyone else, of the actual cost of war. And while we, of course, always see brave, valiant Ukrainian soldiers laughing, dancing, doing incredible jobs, doing untold things, there is a side to war that is always unfortunate. And we can see that the Russians here have ensured that this unfortunate side has met this poor man in the face-to-face. And the poor man's having a rough time with what he's having to go through. There's not really a lot to comment on that video, and so we're going to move on to the next one. Further on the front, down in the southern area, we've seen today that the Azov has taken out Russian vehicles. Of course, a lot of people may have thought that the Azov was only within the Azovstal plant in Mariupol itself, but the Azov is actually all over. There are multiple Azov units, and we can see here today that the Azov that is still surviving up into the southern front has knocked out some Russian vehicles that were hidden within this aluminum shed. The Russians never get a break, and the Azov is going to make sure that they pay for every single one of the prisoners that they took at the Azovstal. That is the end of the video, but it is great to see that the Ukrainians are making sure that the Russians will pay every single way possible for causing grief, pain, and suffering on the Ukrainian people, like we saw that poor man in Mariupol. Once again, my best wishes to that man. I don't know what he's going through, but it seemed to have been something terrible. And so we're now going to move on to the next bit of news on the southern front, where we can see the 45th Artillery in action, and they filmed this stuff like a movie. So I'm going to let y'all see this real quick. It was really impressive cinematography on their part. I had to say, whoever filmed this video filmed it like a movie. We can see them using a Mr. B towed artillery piece here. I'm a huge fan of great cinematics. This is something that I find very artistic, and I have to say that the filters that they used on the camera's lens, as well as the shots that they took, were very well thought out, and I have to say I'm very impressed with the camera work. Unfortunately, there's no audio. I do have the audio unmuted, but there's just none. So sadly, I can't let y'all hear the wonderful audio if it had any. And that is the end of the video. But I wanted to show it off because I thought it was a pretty impressive bit of film work. Of course, we know that the 45th Artillery here in the Southern Front has been doing amazing amounts of work, and so I believe that the cinematic is a great homage to what they've been doing. We're now going to move down further and into Russian-occupied territory, into the town of Melitopol. Today we've seen a small protest being held by some Ukrainians, showing that they are still in support of being Ukrainian. Here is that video.
Мелітополь – це Україна! Мелітополь – це Україна! Мелітополь – це Україна! Слава Україні! Героям слава!
Hopefully they get the message across, and hopefully the Ukrainian forces will liberate them within the coming months. The last bit of news we have from the Melitopol area before we move on to what's occurred over in the Kherson area today is that the Russians are now railroading in even more tanks and vehicles. First we saw T-62s, now we're seeing T-72Bs. T-72Bs are still incredibly old and dated. They're not at all what would be considered modern and up-to-date equipment, but we can see that they're bringing in even more. This leads me to have two conclusions. One, the Russians have taken so many losses, this is required for them to reinforce their units in this area. Or two, they're bringing these in and they're preparing for an offensive. I don't think they have the logistical abilities to continue on an offensive with this amount of vehicles, but at the same time, they could try. Nothing ever stops them from trying, and so that may be one possibility. Still, it's interesting to see, and it's good to know that we do have people who are giving us valuable information within the Melitopol area about what's going on there. We're now going to move on over into the Kherson area, where today we've seen some more interesting news. First off, the counterattack has been a success and has managed to push back the Russians another 5 miles today. I was able to confirm that with the link here in this description, as the Ukrainians push beyond the villages of Andriivka, Lazove, and Beloyivka, and we're able to push all the way down to Kostromka, which is another 5 miles distance. So the Ukrainians are putting in the work, and it looks like they're getting a lot out of it. Not only that, but it appears that the Russian forces down here near Kherson are not having a good time either. Here, for example, we can see that the Russians near Kherson look like they're straight out of World War II. Look at this. Pathetic. This is a boy. This is an old man. Both of them have Mosin Nagants with 3.5 magnification scopes on it, and they look terrible. They have old Soviet-style belt buckles. These may even be DPR and LPR troops, but they are poorly equipped. No body armor, no helmet, dirt poor, terrible, awful. They even have a telegraph here. Piss poor. There's no other way to explain this. This unit is in shambles. It's in tatters. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news in the Kherson area, where we can see today that the Russians and the Ukrainians have taken turns obliterating each other. First, the Russians tried to slow the Ukrainians' advance in their offensives towards Kherson, and also trying to close the pocket, and this barrage today that was caught on film. So I'm going to let y'all see this real quick. So you can see Ukrainian forces are moving around, And soon Russian artillery will land near them, but it didn't look like it landed on them. Actually, it looked like it landed on them. It looks like it landed on the front of the house. We can see a second shell landing in a very similar location. But while this video did appear to show that the Russian artillery hit the Ukrainians dead on, the Ukrainians then obliterated the Russians in kind. So here's the video of them returning fire on a Russian artillery unit here in the fields near Kherson. You can see the Russian artillery right there where my mouse cursor is circling. And here in a second, you're about to see the mushroom clouds of Ukrainian artillery raining down on top of them and reminding them that there is no reason for them to be in the Russian army. We can now see the artillery raining down nearby. It appears that it's most likely an MLRS due to the small size of the explosions and also the rapidity of the blasts. And also the wide dispersion. We can now see them freaking out and trying to move. It looks like they may have left the pieces behind, and they're just trying to get out of there any way they can. We now see the artillery raining down on them again. And very close this time. They're pretty much driving into the fire. We can actually see that one of them just got hit. And they were on the move. So that guy literally drove into the artillery fire. That fire wasn't precisely aimed at him. He was trying to drive out of it and then drove into it. What a clown. We can now see that the fire continues. They're trying to cook some Rice Krispies over there. And we can see that the second vehicle is trying to hightail it out there and has most likely left their friends who are burning to crisps inside of that vehicle. Most like that one got out, but the other one wasn't so lucky. So, pretty interesting to see. Also, another clarification here. Hoofhearted in the live chat just asked, any special guest tonight? Unfortunately not. We were supposed to have Operator Starsky on, but due to some complications in his schedule, he had to report to his unit's headquarters early this morning. He was not able to get on. So to answer that question, not tonight, sadly. So we're now going to move on out of the Kherson area, and we're now going to move on to our final bit of news for the night. The speech from the man, the myth, the legend, Volodymyr Zelensky. Here's the address, and I'm just going to let it play and let y'all see what he has had to say today on the 29th of May.
Міцні народи нашої незламної країни, усі наші захисники і захисниці. Це моє звернення присвячено 4 містам України: Харкову, Києву, Сєвєродонецьку і Кривому Рогу. А через них всій нашій державі, всім нашим містам і громадам. Сьогодні я відвідав Харків, і саме місто і передові позиції наших військових в області. Харків пережив страшні удари окупантів. Чорні, опалені вогнем, напівзруйновані житлові будинки міста дивляться своїми вікнами на схід та північ, туди, звідки била російська артилерія, звідки прилітала російська бойова авіація. Вони дивляться на Росію, і у них зараз, як у дзеркалі, російська держава може побачити себе. Побачити, скільки всього вона програла за ці 95 днів повномасштабної війни проти України. Росія вже програла не тільки битву за Харків, не тільки битву за Київ і північ нашої країни. Вона програла власне майбутнє і будь-які культурні зв'язки з вільним світом. Вони всі згоріли, зокрема і там, на Салтівці. Провів нараду з керівництвом області, міста, подякував їм за те, що вони були і залишаються разом з харків'янами, разом з Україною. І що дуже важливо зараз, разом один з одним. У них співпраця на 100%, армія, поліція, мер Харкова, обласна державна адміністрація, всі дійсно працюють на перемогу і роблять це дуже ефективно. На жаль, цього не скажеш про місцеве керівництво по лінії Служби безпеки України. Я приїхав, розібрався, звільнив очільника Служби безпеки України області за те, що не працював на захист міста з перших днів повномасштабної війни, а думав тільки про себе особисто. Які мотиви правоохоронці з'ясують. Третина Харківщини досі під окупацією. Обов'язково звільнимо всю територію. І на цей результат повинен працювати кожен на посадах, як на місцевому рівні, так і на державному. Перед поїздкою я підписав указ про нагородження наших захисників і захисниць. 222 учасника бойових дій відзначені державними нагородами. І я мав честь сьогодні вручити особисто частину нагород з цього указу та інших, що були підписані раніше в ході поїздки. Дуже предметно обговорили з місцевою владою післявоєнне відновлення Харкова та Харківської області. Маємо застосувати тільки передові ідеї, тільки сучасні технології при відбудові. Зокрема, і безпекові технології, і найкращі пропозиції від наших партнерів. Як і Харків, так і всі інші міста і громади нашої країни, які зачепила війна, маємо зробити такими, щоб вони виглядали найбільш сучасно в Європі. Повернення зі Сходу у Київ в цей час залишає доволі неоднозначне враження. Після мовчання Салтівки, заповнений людьми і усмішками Хрещатик. Після гуркоту артилерії на передовій розслабленість киян, які сьогодні гуляли містом. У День міста, День Києва, який щороку святкують тисячі людей. Але саме за таке щастя жити своїм звичайним життям і просто тихо гуляти вулицями свого власного міста, зараз і йде ця війна. Ось що ми виборюємо в ній для усіх в Україні. Свободу і спокій. Те, що дійсно можна було б сьогодні відчути у Києві. Навіть попри сирену повітряної тривоги, яка пролунала і в цей день. Тож я бажаю вам, кияни і киянки, берегти цей свій спокій життя, берегти своє місто і обов'язково пам'ятати, чого коштував захист столиці. Пам'ятати, скільки життів віддано за столицю. Я розумію, що у ваших очах вже літо. І я все це розумію, але я хочу, щоб у ваших думках було це розуміння. Нам ще належить боротись. Війна ще не закінчилась. Софія і Лавра, і Андріївськ, і Поділ, і Володимирівськ, і Рейтерська, і Ліпки, і Хрещатик. Я вдячний усім, хто зробив так, щоб окупанти більше ніколи не було місця тут, у Києві. І я дуже чекаю на той день, коли зможу сказати подібні слова ще одному нашому місту, яке сьогодні мало би відзначати також свій день, так само, як і Київ. Але Росія підійшла надто близько до нього, надто значні сили зібрані на нашому Донбасі, надто підготовилась до наступу там. Вважаю дуже символічним, що російські військові свою спробу захопити Сєвєродонецьк почали із того, що зайшли в готель під назвою «Мир». Мир – це дійсно найперша мішень для Росії. Забравши у нас мир в 2014 році, окупанти хочуть забрати і все інше. Буквально все. Хочуть не залишити нам ані свободи, ані будинків, ані життя. Внаслідок російських ударів в Сєвєродонецьку зруйнована вже вся критична інфраструктура міста. 90% будинків пошкоджені. Більше 2/3 житлового фонду міста повністю зруйновано. Немає зв'язку. Постійні обстріли. Захопити Сєвєродонецьк – це принципове завдання для окупаційного контингенту. І їм все одно, якою кількістю життів доведеться заплатити за цю спробу підняти російський прапор на бульварі, як гірко зараз звучить ця назва – Дружби народів. Дружби народів 32, де розташована Сєвєродонецька адміністрація. Ми робимо все, щоб стримати цей наступ. Не було жодного дня, щоб ми не старалися знайти більше зброї, більше сучасної зброї для захисту нашої землі. захисту наших людей. І я вдячний кожному і кожній, хто тримає оборону Сєвєродонецька і демонструє окупантам, що мир все одно буде наш. У всій нашій державі, на всьому Донбасі і, звичайно, у Сєвєродонецьку. Ще одне місто, до якого я хочу звернути сьогодні. Для мене, звичайно, місто особливе. Мій рідний Кривий сьогодні також відзначає день народження, вже 247-й. Мав би відзначати, але час не той, умови не ті, і ворог все ще на нашій землі. Час, щоб святкувати, буде після нашої перемоги, а вона буде. І сьогодні хочу побажати саме цього і своєму рідному місту, і усім містам і громадам нашої великої країни. Щоб час до перемоги був коротший. Маємо працювати для цього усі, кожен і кожна без виключень. У своїй інаугураційній промові 3 роки тому я сказав, що кожен із нас президент. І саме зараз це відчувається найбільше. Бо наше майбутнє залежить не тільки від моїх дій у цьому кабінеті президента України, чи від того, що роблять в інших кабінетах Києва, але й від того, що робиться у Харкові, у Сумах, в Кривому і Одесі, у Львові і Ужгороді, в Луцьку і Вінниці, в Миколаєві і Дніпрі, в Житомирі і Чернігові, в Полтаві і Кропивницькому, в Чернівцях, Франківську, в Тернополі, в Рівному, у Хмельницькому і Черкасах. І звичайно, в Херсоні, в Запорізькій області і на всій території нашого Донбасу і в Криму. Та єдність, яку побачив на власні очі сьогодні у Харкові, той героїзм, який проявляють щоденно наші воїни на Донбасі, та рішучість, яка є у Кривому, ось це наш шлях. Шлях до того, щоб в усій Україні, як і раніше, завжди відчувався спокій, життя. І щоб завжди панували усмішки, а не гуркіт артилерії. Вічна слава усім, хто захищає нашу державу. Вічна пам'ять кожному і кожній, хто загинув за Україну. Слава Україні!
And with that, that is the end of the speech from President Zelensky, and that rounds out tonight's news on the stream for day 95. We'll, of course, go and answer many questions, as many as we can, and then we'll be rounding out tonight's stream after that. So it's not entirely over, just for some people who think that it may be, it's not. And so with that, we're now going to go into the questions segment. And so what do we got? And also, how far have we made it on that fundraiser, Matthew?
So we're currently sitting at $8.4 thousand. So we're getting pretty close to reaching 10,000. It's possible we might hit that before the stream ends tonight. But I want to recognize our top donors. Of course, we have a $150 donation from Michael Hudkins, and then we have several $100 donations. We have one from Steve Furman, one from Greg Palmer, Krister Peterson, Paolo Corradini, Brian Cave, and then we have a $70 donation from Putin, my butt, when, and then a $50 donation from Don D, and also a $50 donation from Ashley. And thank you very much to all of you for your big support. And thank you very much to everyone else, for also putting in a donation.
And I have to thank you all so much as well, because we have now reached well beyond the $5,000 goal, and we're going on into the $9,000 and $10,000 range, and there's really no reason for it to, but I am more than happy for it to. This is incredibly great. It's wonderful. But I was thinking tonight, I was like, oh, if I put a $5,000 goal, they'll all calm down and they'll reach the $5,000 goal, maybe 6,000 or 7,000, but it won't go farther than there. And it's never stopped, so I'm pretty happy about that. But once again, everyone, I did set the goal low just in case if some of y'all are getting a little bit worn down, these fundraisers are grinding down on y'all can take a break tonight. Just keep that in mind. So there's no pressure at all. We've already reached the goal. If you want to support, go ahead, be more than welcome. But do remember that this week and the next one are going to kind of be like down periods, so that way we don't have people getting like worked to death trying to fundraise for these things. And so with that, we're now going to go into the questions.
All right, and first up on our questions, we have one from Justin Norse, who says, Enforcer, have you heard anything about Russia raising the maximum age to list to 50 years old, and they are giving them a maximum of 30 days training before they move them into the war.
I have not heard about either of those things. I'm not really sure if those are true or not. Of course, I don't have any information to verify them, but I feel like the shortening of training would be a normal thing to do, but at the same time, the Russians swear up and down that they're using no conscripts. So, in that regard, I don't know if that would particularly matter or not. I think it may be true though, but unfortunately, I don't have any information to back it up. And so, I hope that kind of answers the question on my end. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And next up, we have a question from CH, who says, Enforcer, do the Russians have drones with bomblets like the Ukrainians? Are there obvious differences in Ukrainian, NATO versus Russian technologies?
Yes, they do have drones with bomblets. That's something that they have as well, but they have massive differences. For example, they use a fairly decent bit, from what we can tell, hand grenades in red solo cups, pretty much. That's like one of their most common ways of using a drone. They also have a lot of spotter drones like the Ukrainians do, and then they have a few that seem to be able to drop like mortar rounds and stuff like that, but they don't have drones like the Ukrainians have. They're there, but they're different enough that they're not really the same, and they are lacking in some of the abilities. So I hope that answers the question, and with that, we're on to the next one.
And next up, we have a question from Shannon Alaminsky, who says, Enforcer, now that Vlad has raided the Russian museums for the next wave T-62s, how long before we see horses on the battlefield, or did the orcs eat them after they ate the dogs?
Well, I thank you very much for the question. I was about to say support. I usually get brainwashed in saying something like location unknown or support. But to answer that question, I don't think it would be long before we see them pulling out T-55s. Like, while that's not a horse-drawn wagon, I could see them pulling out T-55s soon because they have a decent amount of them in storage. And also, I think that they probably have eaten the horses at this point. So I hope that kind of answers the question. I'm sorry if I am a little bit slow sounding tonight. I don't like to complain a lot about me being exhausted, but considering I didn't have a coffee tonight, my liquid energizer is gone tonight. And so while I'm trying to hang in here and keep excited sounding and stuff, believe me, I'm literally about to pass out. So we're going to answer probably as many questions as I can before I feel like I'm actually about to lose it and just like slip out of consciousness, and then we'll end out the stream. And so with that, I hope I answered that question, and we're on to the next one.
And next up, let me give a shout out to Dmitry Sudnik for putting in a $50 donation to the fundraiser. Thank you very much for that. And moving on, we have a question from Ken Kotuko, who says, question, why wouldn't the Ukrainians shell or blow up the wheat grains on the Russians' transports rather than letting them take it? What are your thoughts?
I believe that they may have most likely been out of range for the large part, and so that may have led them to not being able to destroy them. So I think that's really the only reasonable answer I could give for that. Maybe they didn't know where they were, or they slipped under their radar. That could also be some other answers. And also, the Ukrainians may be hoping that they'll eventually be able to get that food back, or if they attack the Russians, there could be some problems resulting from that. So I hope that I hope that wide variety of answers can kind of give some explanations as to why that may have occurred. But I do thank you for the question. I hope that does answer it pretty well. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a chat from William Harris, who says, do you think that Russia has changed its thoughts about all of Ukraine and are going to settle for eastern and southern Ukraine, or will they just keep leveling everything they can get?
Oh, they've already changed that idea a while ago. They've already given up all of Ukraine, and they've changed their war goals to taking the Donbass entirely. So in that regard, they've already done that. So I hope that kind of answers the question very briefly. And with that, also something else interesting. I know that a lot of people don't play this game called War Thunder, but I actually found out today that the grandpa guy who did a lot of the Thunder Show narrating, I am so-and-so, welcome to the Thunder Show. He's actually a Russian shill. I found that out today, which is interesting. But of course, War Thunder isn't a Russian company, and they've made it clear that he was a freelance voice actor, and he didn't actually work for Gaijin Entertainment, which I found interesting. And just to let y'all into my world of news that I get and don't include on the news, that was very interesting to me, and I lost a lot of respect for that guy right off the bat. And so with that, we're on to the next question.
And up next, we have one from T. Thomason, who says, what effect will the MLRS have on the battlefield?
The MLRS is, if you're talking about the M142, have an incredibly long range of around 186 miles, and so they can hit targets so far away the Russians wouldn't even be able to really consider doing anything about it. For example, 186 miles, if I was to measure that out on the map, would be about that far. So they'd be able to fire from the town of Pereshepny all the way to Bivobst, or they could fire all the way from Kiev. Let me just do it from up here because this will be a better measurement. No, better yet, we're going to do it from Zaporizhia. From Zaporizhia in any direction at the front lines, they can fire 186 miles. So this MLRS could hypothetically fire into the middle of Crimea if it wanted to. So that's kind of the idea that you could be getting about how effective that MLRS is going to be, is that almost nothing is going to be out of its reach. So I thank you very much for the question. I hope that does answer it, at least in brief. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a chat from Coder for Liberty, who says, Enforcer, do the Ukrainians still have the Turkish drones? We haven't seen them for quite some time.
Yes, they do have the Bayraktar. Bayraktar. Yeah, they got it. We haven't been hearing a lot of news about them because I guess they're just not using them as much. But we do know that there are countries that are still buying Bayraktars for Ukraine, and so we do know that they're still out there and still being used. Of course, for a good while, we didn't hear anything about the Ukrainian Air Force, and everyone just automatically assumed if we heard nothing about them, they were destroyed. I did that too. And now we can see that the Ukrainian Air Force is largely intact as well. And so with that, I hope that answers the question, and we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have a chat from GHLKLZ, who says, what's going on with the Belarusian staging for attack going back to their bases?
I haven't heard about them going back to their bases, but that whole entire thing may have been a ploy for the Ukrainians to have to divert forces to the border in hopes that would weaken the Ukrainian positions around Severodonetsk. Apparently that didn't pan out, and then the Belarusians said, hey, we don't even have a military budget in the first place to keep doing this. They need to go back to their bases. So that may be the explanation as to why that happened, but unfortunately, I don't have any information about that as of right now. Of course, I would focus more so on frontline news within Ukraine, and so that kind of stuff that's outside of the country can kind of pass under my radar. So I hope I kind of answered that question the best way I could. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a chat from Alex C. Balla, who says, Enforcer, have you heard of the Lithuanians who crowdsourced $5 million in the last 3 days for a Bayraktar drone?
I did, actually, and Starsky actually shared that news as well, and I think that's incredibly cool that the Lithuanians have managed to gather up enough funds to buy a Bayraktar. Anyways, I'm not going to go through that whole entire thing again, but still, it was incredibly cool to hear, and I think that is a great service for Ukraine from their Eastern European friends. And so with that, I hope I answered that question, and we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from Jungle Jim AB9AB, who says, Enforcer, this was posted on Reddit 9 hours ago that a T-84 has arrived at the Aberdeen Proving Ground. Do you think this is a newsworthy development? Is this a first?
I'm not really sure if it's a first. I'm not really sure if it's newsworthy because the T-84 is kind of standard. Well, it's good, but it's not, like, exceptional. It's kind of like an M1 Abrams arriving at the Aberdeen Proving Ground. So I hope that kind of answers what I'm thinking about it, because while it is a Ukrainian tank, it's not like it's, like, earth-shattering or anything. If that is true, I wouldn't necessarily consider that newsworthy. But I do thank you for asking that, and I hope that kind of answers the question, at least as to what I'm thinking. And also another thing, before we move on, a lot of people say, a lot of people joke, and I know it's a joke, and I find it funny too, but a lot of people joke and are probably wondering, why do I always say things like, with that being said, and we're moving on to the next question, and I hope I answer that, and I usually say stuff like that near the end of every single question. And to let y'all in on something behind the scenes, that gives Matthew enough prep time while I'm saying that to be prepared to already have the next question lined up, so that way I'm not just giving y'all an answer and then I just leave him hanging, and he has to either figure out that I'm not making a pause and I need another question or something like that. So just to explain it, because I don't think that's ever really been explained a lot, is that's the reason why I say very repetitive statements like that, so that way there is a clear key and indicator that we will be moving on to the next one and we need to be ready to do that. So I just wanted to answer that real quick, although there wasn't a question about it, and let y'all know why that is a thing, because I know it bothers some of y'all, and it's really to keep the show running as smoothly as possible. And so with that, I hope I've kind of answered that question very well. Y'all can see me doing it right there. And with that, we're on to the next question.
And those transitions are actually really helpful, and it prevents me from getting caught off guard and going, huh? What'd you say? Huh?
Yeah, that's true, and that's something that we coordinate a lot, and I don't think a lot of people understand that, because I saw someone say, Captain Shikicker said your vocabulary needs expansion. I don't know what you're talking about there in particular, but if you're talking about like those transitions, they're said in a certain way the exact same time for a reason. So with that, we're moving on to the next question.
So up next, we have a question from Derek Rosefan, who says, Enforcer, this is my third stream. I love the vids, and my question is, do you think that the Russians will ever try to make a full-on assault to Odessa at some point or not? Slava Ukraine.
Well, I thank you so much for being brand new. If this is your third stream, welcome on board. There's been a lot of people who've been around for ages, and I welcome you into this wonderful community. They're all incredibly nice people. Of course, there are a few skirmishes. Like, if you ever go to our Discord, there's like, every once in a while, there's like a small little thing that happens, but that's just people being people. But still, I do welcome you on board, and to answer that question, the Russians will never make it to Odessa. To do that, they need Mykolaiv, and they're not even within sight of ever capturing Mykolaiv. So, I hope that answers that question in brief. Because there's not really a lot to go into. They need one prerequisite to be able to consider that, and they don't even have it. So with that, welcome on board. Once again, it's really cool to hear that we do have a new viewer in here, and I hope I did answer that question to the best of my abilities. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And yes, welcome to the Leaf Spring Army, Derek. It's good to have you. So up next, we have a question from one of our viewers that is first to almost every single stream, who competes with me for first place. We have a question from Mortlock, who says, I heard that Zelensky fired the Kharkiv Oblast governor.
I think I heard that as well. I didn't really harp on it too much, because whenever I hear someone's got fired, I'm like, it's like a change of the colors kind of thing. But yes, I did hear that, and Zelensky also suggested to the police in that area that they should investigate him because of his actions. So that's showing that apparently Zelensky doesn't have faith in his command, and hopefully the police do investigate him and see if that was a deliberate action on that governor's part or not. So I thank you very much for bringing that up. That is something I saw, but I didn't really harp on too much. And with that, we're on to the next question.
And next up, we have a question from King Mac, who says, Enforcer, this week the Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby stated that Russia has lost 10% of their capability with 15,000 killed in action. It's been reported that 30,000 killed in action and 79,000 wounded. So what is the true number?
The true number is 30,000 killed and 70-something thousand or more wounded. The Russians long ago said that they had 10,000 dead. That was about the first month of the war, and 2 more months have gone by, and they've only been losing more and more soldiers per day, so it wouldn't make a lot of sense for them to be losing several hundred soldiers a day for the next 2 months after they came out and said 10,000 have been killed, and then say they've only lost 15,000. That number wouldn't make much sense. The Ukrainian number is actually pretty on par, because whenever the Russians did verify their numbers, they were almost identical with the Ukrainian numbers that were coming out at that time. So the actual number is 30,000 Russian soldiers killed and an unknown amount wounded, probably above 80,000. And so I hope that answers the question, and with that, we're moving on to the next one.
And let me give a shout out to Dima Kajavenko. I'm butchering that terribly, but thank you very much for your donation to the fundraiser. It's helping quite a bit. I think we're up to, let's see here, 8.8 thousand at the moment. So getting pretty close to that $10,000 mark. So I'll be curious to see if we can actually hit that by the time the stream is over. But let's see here. Our next question is from Linda Vickers, who says, don't you think that it is time that the Russians do a Rasputin on Putin?
Rah, rah, Rasputin, lover of the Russian queen. I think so. Yeah, the song's catchy, so I think they ought to do it. But in all seriousness, in a coup, while you wouldn't really want to go through all the things that they had to go through to kill Rasputin, I think just putting a bomb in a meeting room would be about as effective as anything. You know, that's what they tried on Hitler, and while it failed, which was a miracle to, like, the universe, well, not really a miracle, because it wasn't really a good thing. It was unfortunate that Hitler didn't die, but still, it was unbelievable. He was literally in a concrete room. There was nothing in that room that was not concrete, and then that bomb blew up, and somehow the shrapnel didn't shoot around and hit him and kill him, but it killed a whole bunch of other people in the room and wounded them, which is really weird when you really, really think about it. But I think that would be an effective way to get Putin if someone wanted to actually take him out. So I hope that answers the question, and with that, we're on to the next one.
And just a quick thanks to Merwin for putting in a $20 donation, and also to Yoli H for putting in a $50 donation. Thank you very much for your support of our fundraiser. And moving on, we have a question from Roy Hughes, who says, how about a push by you two to send all the Leaf Spring Army over to the Reddit post about our channel and vote up so it appears first in the sub category?
I mean, like, we could. Actually, I'll hop over to Reddit real quick, and I'll show everyone this post. I was a huge fan of it. I liked it a lot. So let me go to Ukraine. New, hot. Maybe it's under hot? No, the hot one's got thousands of stuff on them. So it's definitely not these. So let me go through the new ones. It's probably about like 6 hours ago at this point, so it won't be hard for me to find. But let me just scroll down there real quick and try and find it. 2, 3 hours ago, 4 hours ago. Hopefully it hasn't been removed, because I feel like the mods may have just been like, you know, and then removed it. So let's see if it has been. There we go. Here it is. It's gotten 167 upvotes. It's on the Ukraine subreddit, and it was uploaded by Metadomino. So Metadomino, if you're in this live chat right now, I thank you so much. The little caption to this post was really nice. I also saw a lot of nice comments down here in the chat below. You know, of course, everyone was giving great reviews. I also put in a little comment myself saying this is the Enforcer. And also, if you ever see me commenting on Reddit, unfortunately, the Enforcer was taken already on Reddit, which was kind of sad. So my account is actually the Enforcer 176. Just letting y'all know in advance, though, I never respond to anything on Reddit. I have some people who've sent me messages on Reddit, but I never actually sit on Reddit. Like, I go through and I get my information and stuff that I'm looking for there, but I never hang out. If you would like, make sure to upvote this thing. It will reach more people, and that may be a really nice way to bring in more people into the fold of the Leaf Spring Army and the nightly news here. And so, with that, I hope you all upvote this. We'll actually keep that up and check on it here in a minute, but this is where it is. It was uploaded by Metadino 7 hours ago on the Ukraine subreddit. And so, with that, we're going to move on to the next question, and thank you for the interesting idea.
And real quick, a big thanks to Robin for putting in a $100 donation and putting us right over that $9,000 mark on the fundraiser. Thank you very much for that. And we are creeping closer to that $10,000 mark. So let's see how it keeps going. And up next, we have a question from Kellen Hansen, who says, Enforcer, Ukraine has said there have been over 30,000 Russian soldiers killed. What is the usual casualty to fatality ratio in modern wars?
There really is not a usual fatality to casualty rate. It can be different, but usually, if you're going off of a standard set, it would usually be for every 1 soldier killed, there are 2 wounded, or for 1 soldier killed, there are 3 wounded. It kind of just depends, but usually it's really closer to 1 and 3. So if there's been 30,000 killed, the number would really be close, if it was a perfect ratio, to around 90,000 wounded. So I hope that kind of answers the question. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And next up, we have a question from Zach Jeffers, who says, do you guys think that the UN peacekeepers should get involved? The civilian deaths are heartbreaking, and it needs to end now.
That's something I could get behind, but the problem is that if UN peacekeepers go in, the Russians could act like it's World War III, and then we go into a global war. The suffering would continue around more parts of the world, and then, you know, it could lead to a nuclear onslaught, which would be the epitome of suffering. So I understand where where everyone's coming from saying that, and also I think that sometimes too. But once again, we always have to exercise a little bit of caution because we can make this a lot worse than it already is. I think that supporting Ukraine with arms has been pretty good in its own right, and maybe starting training programs for Ukrainian soldiers where we bring them abroad into countries like the United States and train them on the weapon systems here may be a great help to them as well. So I hope that kind of answers the question. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from Shine W, who says, Enforcer, okay, so Russia brings in lots of tanks, yeah? Where are the support vehicles?
They're not there. That's the funny thing. They just bring in the tanks, but they never bring in the logistics vehicles or anything like that. And so those tanks have no support whatsoever. So I hope that answers the question. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And moving on, we have a question from Pakatang, who says, Enforcer, how can Ukraine transition the war from an artillery battle to another form of combat that better favors the Ukrainians?
Actually, I would have to say that artillery combat most suits them. Artillery combat leads to low casualties on their end because they're not actually putting infantry and tanks out in the line of fire in front of the Russians. They're hitting the Russians from an area where they can't be seen, and they're using drones to guide in the fire. So as far as that process is concerned, it's the lowest casualty kind of strategy that the Ukrainians could implement. I don't really think they want to change to another kind of strategy because that means that they might start chewing up their own resources in terms of tanks, armored personnel carrier, trained infantry, and such things like that, and I don't think it'd necessarily be good for them. So I think, honestly, that they should keep to their artillery strategy as it lessens their own casualties by massive margins. And so I hope I answered that question pretty well, and with that, we're on to the next one. And before we do, we're actually going to check the little Reddit post here real quick. Has it gotten any more upvotes? Oh, it has. Wow. Like, it's gotten like 12 or so. That's really cool. Let's see if we can get that thing up to 300. I don't know. Let's find out. And also, let's see. Oh, okay, no one's sent in a new comment here yet, but still really neat. And with that, we're on to the next question.
And up next, we have a comment from Anthony Bestwick, who says, Enforcer, please watch Jeremy Clarkson Greatest Raid. It was the next day Hitler ordered 2 commandos to be executed if captured. And Anthony, I'll just say I'm a huge fan of the original Top Gear trio, so it's good to hear a mention of Jeremy. He's been kind of quiet here recently.
He became a farmer on a farm plot, and he always said he'd never become one. And it's really weird to me because no one expected Jeremy Clarkson to become a farmer, and now he is, like, legitimately, unironically a farmer. But there's nothing wrong with farmers. I got a lot of friends that are farmers, and honestly, it's neat. It's cool. But I never expected him to become one. So with that, I will make sure to take a look into that. I think I know what you might be talking about. He actually did a documentary on the San Nazaire raid, which was very good, and I actually watched it. So if that's what you're talking about, I've seen it, and I loved it. And with that, thank you so much for the question, and we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a comment from Cody Baker, who says, Enforcer, how much of an impact do you think the M270 MLRS and M142 HIMARS will have on the battlefield?
I haven't heard about the M270 being sent over, but I have heard about the M142 being sent over. The M142 is going to have a massive effect on the battlefield because it's going to be so far away from the front lines when firing that it's not really going to be ever in range of any kind of counter battery fire, and the Russian aircraft will most likely have to fly dozens of miles into Ukrainian territory over multiple SAM batteries to try and reach this MLRS and then destroy it. So in that perspective, I think it's going to be a massive improvement for their artillery, considering that it's nearly going to be invincible, at least in theory. Of course, it can be destroyed. There is always that chance. But as far as it being compared to conventional artillery, the normal MLRSs that are there, and even the M777, it is so far out of reach for the Russians to attack, it's going to be nearly impossible. So I hope that answers the question of how it's going to change the battlefield, as in being pretty much an invincible artillery piece just because of how far away it's firing from. And with that, we're on to the next question.
And we have another question from Derek Rosefan, who says, my next question is, do you think Russia will move towards Odessa if they take Mykolaiv? Slava Ukraine.
Yeah, so they took Mykolaiv. That would be the next logical step. I'm so sorry, everyone. If I'm butchering words and stuff, I'm literally just hanging in here, and I think we're only going to answer about 5 more questions from the chat and then round out the stream at this point, because without a coffee, I'm hardly here. So, Mykolaiv is a prerequisite to taking Odessa. If they took Mykolaiv, they would logically be going for Odessa. It's the next closest city, and it's also strategically important to Ukraine, as it's pretty much opening up the rest of the country to invasions, and it's also creating a land bridge to the Russian forces in Transnistria. So I hope that answers the question, and with that, we're going to answer 5 more questions from the chat, and then we're going to round out tonight's stream. I'm very sorry, I did say I would try and answer as many questions as possible, and I still am trying to, but at the same time, I'm so exhausted, it's getting really hard to answer them. And so with that, we are on to the next question.
And up next, we have a question from Diffuse56, who says, do you guys know what he was talking about in reference to the security service guys being fired? This is news to me.
I don't really know what in particular he was talking about. I think he was talking about the governor of Kharkiv being fired, and I think it was because of some kind of lack of creating a defensive or pushing an offensive. But regardless, the performance that Zelensky has seen has not pleased him. Apparently, it's been something that is bad enough to have them removed, and so he's had them removed from their position. So I kind of hope that answers the question vaguely, because I don't have a lot of information to go off on that one myself. And so with that, thank you so much for asking the question, Diffuse56. You've been around for an incredibly long time, and I hope that answer did suit you a pretty good bit and give you kind of a better idea of what may have happened. And so with that, we're going to answer the next one.
And next up, we have a question from Sweet Cheeks again, who says, have you noticed that a lot of the older Russian generation supports the quote-unquote special operation, and the younger ones are against it? We need the younger ones to spread the truth.
Yes, I do believe so, and the older ones are for it because, of course, they're from the Soviet Union times and descent throughout most of it. Of course, it was different through different times in the Soviet Union's history. There were kind of different levels of how much you could criticize the government, and the only time you could openly criticize the government, at least in theory, was around the end with Gorbachev. But before that, you just had to be all for the government, or you were either, put in prison, or you were taught how to think the right way. And so that's why a lot of older Russians sit there and they support the Russian Federation. Is just that's how they grew up. Meanwhile, younger Russians didn't grow up that way necessarily. They grew up in the 90s and 2000s, where Russia was nearly like a free land just run by gangsters. And so they, of course, have, I guess, free will, I guess you could say, in their own minds. So hopefully they're out there trying to spread the information the best they can and educate their families about what's going on. And so with that, I hope I've answered that question fairly well. And with that, we're going to answer 3 more questions from the chat, and then we're going to be rounding out tonight's stream.
And our third to last live chat question goes to Mike D, who says, Enforcer, what do you think Putin's daily briefings are like? Are his generals and intelligence agents telling him the truth or sugarcoating it to protect their own positions in command?
Oh, they're probably sugarcoating it. They're probably saying something like, we've gotten small resistance at Popasna area, but don't worry, over the next day we have attacks planned. We will be taking the highway. And, then they may just start blaming stuff on lower grade commanders and officers and maybe even the soldiers themselves. But I'm sure that they're sugarcoating it, because this kind of performance is poor. And we've already known that Putin has had multiple generals arrested and removed from their positions because of how poor they're doing. But I do believe that a decent amount of them are probably sugarcoating their situations and trying to make the situation sound better. So with that, I hope I've answered that question fairly well. Of course, we don't exactly know what's going on in Russian government circles, because it's all hearsay and assumptions, because we get no information about it. But I'm assuming that that's most likely how it's been going. And with that, we are on to the second to last question for the night.
And next up, we have another question from Sweet Cheeks, who says, Enforcer, can you explain what harpoons actually do?
The Harpoon anti-ship missile is, as in the name, an anti-ship missile. It attacks ships at a fairly good distance away. I believe it has a range of around 175 miles, and so it's an over-the-horizon anti-ship missile. If you were firing that thing from generally ground level and looking out the distance, of course, you're not going to see out 175 miles. So this thing will travel over the horizon and to its target. So pretty much its entire purpose is to attack surface fleet vessels. So ships like the Moskva, of course, but the Moskva was actually sunk by Neptunes. So I hope that answers the question, and I thank you very much for another pretty good question. And with that, we are on to the final question of the night. And so, who is the lucky last person who got in a question?
And before I say that, real quick, I want to give Igor Cantor a shout out for putting in that $50 donation to the fundraiser. Thank you very much, Igor, for that. And our final live chat question comes from CLHRNFL, who says, Enforcer, does the president of Ukraine have his daily speech written by someone, or is it off the cuff? And I would have to say that if that's off the cuff, and as tired as he looks, he has a really, really, really sharp mind.
I would have to say that as well. I can't really answer that. I believe that he may have that written. He may be coming up with it. Of course, you have to remember that he has a huge background in show business, writing his own comedy routines, writing his own shows, stuff like that. And so, as far as a writer goes, and coming up with stuff on the fly, well, at least at a fast pace, he's a master at that. That's what he used to do for a career. And so, I can assume that while the ideas may be his, he may have them written down, so that way he can read them off effectively during a speech. But at the same time, it does look like he's just coming up with the stuff off the cuff. So I'm not really sure which direction I would be leaning in, but to give him the benefit of the doubt, considering that he's been a very impressive person so far, I might lean towards he's actually saying all. Well, I can't say that though. Nah, I can't. I mean, like, he's probably writing this stuff up while he's thinking about it, and then he films the video. Because it would be kind of out of character for him to just do stuff on the fly, because back when he was a comedian, he always wrote up his material, rehearsed it, and then did it. So that would make more sense based off of what he's done in the past, and a lot of people get into routines. Much like how this stream and talking like this for 95 days has led me to talking like this sometimes when I answer questions in general. So I think he would most likely be in the same category of doing something like that. So with that, I hope I answered that question pretty well. And we have reached the end of tonight's stream. It's been a little early. It's only 2 hours and 30 minutes long, but hey, that's still a very long stream in most people's books, considering that last night's stream was a 3 hour and 30 minute long stream. So, with that in mind, I thank you all so much for watching once again. If you are new to this channel, make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. And also, if you would like to help out, let's refresh this one more time. We can see that this thing has gotten another 12 upvotes. If you would like to upvote the little Reddit post, this will help the channel reach out to more people on Reddit who may not know about the kind of thing we do here with the news and fundraising and all that kind of stuff. And so make sure to go boost out the little Reddit thing here, and also like, comment, and subscribe if you're brand new, because that always helps out the channel a lot. And you will be notified when these streams run every single day of the week, except for Mondays, where you can get up-to-date news over the past 24 hours of the war in Ukraine. I thank you all so much once again, and I got to thank you all for getting to $9,000 on tonight's fundraiser. It was not planned for this thing to go beyond 5,000, but we've already gone 4,000 over that, nearly raised twice as much as we were planning to tonight, and nearly got to $10,000. And so, with that in mind, I thank you all so much once again. I am more than proud to know that my community of viewers is the best on the internet. I will fight people and die on that hill, because I believe that 100%. And so, I thank you all once again for watching. It has been an honor to tell you all the news for the day. And, of course, tomorrow I will not be streaming. That will be an off day for me. I will be reenacting. I'm not going to say where. But if you do happen to hear my voice in public and you're at a reenacting event tomorrow, just say, is that the Enforcer? And I will answer, hey everyone, it's the Enforcer, and you will know it's me. So, with that, I thank you all so much once again. And I will see you all on Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you all once again, and I will see you all then. Take care, and good night.